Blessings, beloveds. Anastasia, Cosmic Astrologer, with you again today. Alright, today's topic is going to be on Pluto. I have done a previous video on Pluto, which was more or less an introduction. And there'll be many Pluto videos, potentially, because there is just so much to say about Pluto. Okay, so today I'm actually going to specifically focus on Pluto aspecting the Sun in your birth chart, or Pluto aspecting the Moon in your birth chart. Pluto aspecting any planet is an incredibly powerful energetic unfoldment experience throughout your life, really. A lot of the work that I'm drawing from is from Jeffrey Wolf Green, so the evolutionary astrology model. And of course I've got my own kind of ideas and, you know, other people's readings that I've done, you know, over the years. So anyway, it's just, I've just accumulated, I suppose you could say, my sense and understanding with everything that I've learned. And more importantly, everything I've experienced in my own life with Pluto, because in my case, Pluto happens to aspect just about every single planet in my chart. So yeah, anyway, first thing is that, well, we know Pluto has a 248-year cycle, hence it spends a very long time in the signs as it travels through the zodiac and around the Sun. It's the slowest moving planet, so yeah, it spends a lot of time in each sign, which, you know, that's quite telling within itself. So Pluto equals the soul, in that it represents the soul, the soul's evolution, and how that is unfolding through each incarnation. You know, some incarnations are incredibly intensified through Pluto's presence and how it's interacting with the other planets in the chart, which is part of what I'm talking about today. And then there are lifetimes when, you know, we have a bit of a rest period, if you like, from the intensity and volume that Pluto brings up in life. So if Pluto is aspecting, you know, a lot of planets in your chart, that's a pretty important message for you, suggesting that you the soul has actually chosen to live quite an intensified life at an accelerated level in terms of transformation, metamorphosis, and evolution. So you may not, though, have Pluto aspecting many planets, and you may just have Pluto aspecting your Sun and your Moon. I think even that is an incredibly powerful level of experience when it comes to those things of transformation, evolution, metamorphosis, and so forth. The hard aspects, which are the conjunction, square, and opposition, you could say, although conjunction can be looked upon hard or soft, it just depends how it manifests for the individual. So each of those aspects represent a different expression or mode in terms of how the Pluto and the Sun, or the Pluto and the Moon, will actually play out. But I'm not going to delineate those aspects specifically individually, so if you can just keep in mind any of those three aspects, what I'm about to share will essentially apply, with some variations based on the aspect. So the hard aspects, the conjunction, square, and opposition, suggests that the individual is going through an intensified evolutionary process with the energy of Pluto, and through various points in life they will experience crises, or what Jeffrey Wolf Green more specifically refers to as a cataclysmic cycle or period. Cataclysmic just meaning, well, disaster is another word. It's quite a strong word, but that's essentially what Pluto can do when it's operating at this intensified level in hard aspects. And what usually can happen is that the cataclysmic sort of cyclic events surface, and the soul, or the individual may struggle to understand what's actually trying to change or transform in their life, hence resistance and so forth. And it is not until after the change, transformation or event has taken place that they can actually reflect, look back and understand why they needed to go through such an intensified experience and process in order for this change to come, for this evolution, next part of evolution of their experience to come forward. If however one has softer aspects with Pluto, of course the process of evolution, transformation, metamorphosis is still there, but there's a suggestion that the individual is more in tune and seems to recognize the necessary transformation that needs to take place and has a connection to it in some kind of way, which enables them to have a bit more of a flow of the energy as they're going through their very deep transformational metamorphosis. So that comes through with the softer aspects, such as a trine, a sextile, and the conjunction possibly as well. So now, when we are talking about Pluto and the Sun, the Sun actually shows the evolutionary process as it's integrated and given meaning. So that the Sun with the Pluto gives some kind of meaning to what this Sun-Pluto aspect is trying to bring to the person's life. You know, the Sun is the personality, the ego, right? So Pluto touching the Sun, the transformation and metamorphosis comes through the principle of the Sun, that solar masculine energy, which is the personality. So there has to be an integration with those energies in order for the Sun to actually connect a meaning and a purpose to what is actually happening with this Pluto energy, which is incredibly intense when you've got a Sun-Pluto aspect, and I'll get into that in a moment. And when it's the Moon shows us the purpose and the meaning and the karmic evolutionary conditions that are amplified and applied and actualized on a daily basis. So the Moon is the daily ins and outs, ebbs and flows of life overall. So bring Pluto into that. You know, the Moon it's unconscious, it's our instinctual responses to life on a daily basis, and it's our emotional nature, and it's also elements from the past that come into. The Moon is you could say, the mental memories of the past that are held and contained within the body. And the South Node, if we're talking about past, when you're looking at the South Node in the chart, the South Node's location and sign points to the, you could say, specific details of the environment that one was in. So the South Node is always descriptive of the environment, and the Moon, in relation to the past, holds very specific mental memories in the body. Now, you know, it's a very important point, because it is said that even through the field of psychology, and certainly through EA, evolutionary astrology, and certainly other people's work on astrology, strongly suggests that the majority of one's reactions to life and responses, instinctual responses, 70 to 80% unconscious. Yeah, that's pretty powerful, really, to know that and to understand that, because then you realize that a lot of your behaviors and how you're responding to life and reacting to life in situations and relationships and people and so forth is driven from the unconscious component within us, which is what adds a lot of the complexities and the perhaps inability to understand where certain responses actually came from. you know, when you find yourself in a very important situation or experience that's, you know, got a strong level of intensity, through Pluto's energy, sometimes your responses can be quite surprising even to yourself, because they're driven and motivated from a very unconscious level. So on a rational conscious level, you can sit there and you can say, well, you know, I'll look at this situation and I can understand from a rational perspective that it may look like this or that, and that perhaps I need to approach it in this way or that way. But the unconscious drives and forces have a very different agenda, because they are essentially linked to our past and our instinctive and emotional responses that are tied into past experiences and memories, all of which can relate to a number of different things, including trauma, and, you know, obviously including good things as well. You know, we need to kind of look at the whole picture. But generally, unconscious driven behaviors are very compulsive and obsessive, which is very much a Pluto experience or quality or trait. So when we're talking about you know, Sun-Pluto or Moon-Pluto responses and reactions, typically we are at ease and most comfortable with a lot of the unconscious patterns that come forth in our behaviors, simply because they are familiar to us. We know them, we've lived them, we've been through them, we've experienced them, so there's always a level of safety and security that is present with the familiar, clearly. And it is in this incarnation, you know, as a Pluto, Sun-Pluto or Moon-Pluto, when we are presented with situations that are not familiar and we need to respond, it is the unfamiliar component, the uncertainty, which resides in the present to a large degree, and certainly to the future. That is where fears and insecurities can come up, and we tend to revert to old patterns and behaviours that are unconsciously driven. And a lot of that connects to our shadow stuff as well. You know, if you want to understand your shadow, look at the opposite sign to your sun sign. That's your shadow, essentially. So, you know, that's a whole other video. But an important note to take on board with what I'm discussing here today. So, look, Sun-Pluto aspects are really one of the most powerful combinations, because, you know, the sun is such a personal planet. It's your identity, right? So when you've got Pluto there, it represents so many different things. But essentially, we're talking about a person who's incredibly driven from a soul level, which then extends through and comes through on their personality level, because the personality is the sun. So we're talking about people who are incredibly willful and powerful, who have incredible personal power, who can reinvent themselves, regenerate themselves, and transform themselves. It's the person that, for example, may go through a life where they've built a number of different things in their life which represent who they are on, you know, on the material and on an internal level as well. And they could go through a very intense destructive mode where everything is lost in a sense and destructed and just completely gone. So, you know, lose their job, lose all their money, marriage falls apart, you know, everything just basically disappears, as it were. And this person with Sun-Pluto, you know, they're obviously contributing to these experiences. It's actually part of their metamorphosis. It's part of their evolution. It's part of what they need to go through to be able to transform again. But they'll come out the other end and they'll just reinvent themselves. They'll transform their entire life. They'll start again completely and reinvent a whole new life. And that they'll kind of thrive on that as well. You know, they just have tremendous power and force and ability to be able to tap into that energy and actually do that. They are, you know, larger than life figures. They are the ones that can create, you know, incredible social transformation, you know, in the various ways that that may come through. And I looked at just some examples of famous people's charts so that I can just bring that into today's conversation, just to show you some powerful figures that have come through our history that have been incredible in their craft or talent, or their persuasion and power on that social or political level. And one of my favorite people who I chose is Bruce Lee. Now, Bruce Lee was a Sagittarius, and he had Sagittarius rising, provided that time of birth is correct. But leaving the rising sign out for a moment anyway, he had Pluto aspecting a lot of things in his chart. But you know, I'm not going to talk about his whole chart and everything that Pluto aspected, because today it's about Sun-Pluto aspects, or Sun or Moon-Pluto aspects. Now, Bruce Lee, he did actually have Mars square Pluto, which is such a dynamic, such a powerful aspect to have, which can really cause tremendous conflict and tension in one's life, but can produce incredible results with their power, energy, drive, initiation, courage, and so forth. Pluto was also square his Venus, and it was square his Moon. So he had, it was also trine his Sun, so there was a soft aspect there, and trine his Ascendant and trine his South Node. So Pluto was touching a lot of things in Bruce Lee's chart. But I think it's the Pluto square Mars which really shows to me his just the intensity that he had with his craft and the work that he did, and the power behind his work. Remember, he was the guy who was known for the 1 inch punch, or the 1 inch punch. It was so fast you couldn't actually see. You couldn't see his hand move. It's just phenomenal. Anyway, he's an icon, clearly, but he's a perfect example of someone who had Pluto operating at a very, very intensified, accelerated level in his life, which enabled him to produce and create what he did in his craft and his work. Another person on a very different level, and there's many people, I just chose 3 or 4. Winston Churchill, who was the British politician. He was a historian, he was a speaker, he was a writer. He was into philosophy, he was into art. He wrote 6 volumes in history. He won a Nobel Prize. You know, he was a very powerful figure in our society as well, who accomplished and achieved quite a lot. Now, he had a Sun opposite Mercury. I know that's different to today's topic, but he had a Pluto square Moon. So there's another very powerful example of a powerful figure in society who had Pluto in a hard aspect to a very personal planet, the Moon. Another figure is Carl Jung. Now, I think most of us know who Carl Jung is. You know, the father of psychology, who transcended psychology. So Sigmund Freud went down into the id, the ID, the ego, pre-ego work, and Carl Jung transcended and took us up into the transcendental level and experience of psychology and spirituality with psychology. So he was the father of that. Now, Carl Jung had a Moon-Pluto conjunction. So there you go. There's another example of a very, very powerful figure who influenced a great deal in our world and in the field of psychology and spirituality and astrology as well, actually. Martin Luther King, I think we all know who that was. Another very powerful figure, very influential for many people really, but for America specifically. Now, Martin Luther King had a Sun-Pluto opposition. So there you go. There's another powerful example of another soul coming through, whose part of his soul's evolution and purpose was to transform on a collective level, which he did in fact do. Very powerful figure, and in fact he had a really powerful T-square in his chart with Pluto, Venus and Saturn as well. So there's a few examples of some very powerful public figures who transformed the collective, you could say, and society in their own unique way that each of those people did with their art and craft and power in speech as well. Now, Sun-Pluto is also often very descriptive. When a person has Sun-Pluto aspect in their chart, there's something really powerful and important with the relationship between the person and their father. If it's operating on a healthy, positive, constructive level, then the person who has Sun-Pluto would have had perhaps a very powerful father. Their father was a powerful figure in their life who was powerful in his own life, potentially, and was just a very powerful influence in the person's life, who enabled them to tap into their own power and actually transform. It would have been, it could, not it would have been, sorry, I meant to say, if someone has Sun-Pluto, they would have seen their father as just an incredibly powerful force and figure in their life, probably revering them, putting them up on a pedestal, so to speak. And however, the thing is this: if it's operating on a negative level, then we're talking about perhaps an individual who experiences a father figure who was who abused the power in the relationship. So could have been an abusive relationship, controlling, manipulative, obsessive, all that sort of stuff. Abuse of power, essentially. If you've got Sun-Pluto, you either had a father who abused you in various ways. That was at least your experience anyway, because don't forget, we project, this Sun-Pluto is projected onto the father. This is your Sun-Pluto aspect in your chart being projected onto your own father. So even though a relationship may begin in that power struggles, that's another very good word when Pluto is aspecting a personal planet. Personal planet is often projected onto what that personal planet represents, which is Sun is always the father as well as your own personality and ego. So, there's a projective component that's always there, and the person essentially, though, has the potential and ability to transform themselves and reclaim that personal power back and actually become the Sun-Pluto themselves, which then they become the agent for transformation, not only in their own life, but in other people's lives as well. So it's about actualizing that power that's coming through Pluto into the Sun. If you can find a purpose and actualize that energy, you can transform many different things in your own life and in other people's lives. So Sun-Pluto aspects can also be attracting very powerful men in your life. So if you're a woman, you might just be, projecting that Sun-Pluto onto the men that you are attracted to and drawn to. So attracting very powerful figures in the male element of life. And on a positive level, naturally, that can be someone who's a very powerful, influential partner who can help you transform your own life. And obviously, in a negative way, it can be someone who can be an abusive person who controls you, manipulates you, or it can be that there's just power struggles between you and your partner, and that can swing. One person has the power at one time, the other person has the power at another time, or it can be that both are striving to hold that power, hence the tension and conflict and so forth. But essentially, wherever Pluto is, we're talking about the potential for transformation in the deepest of ways that your mind can't even grasp, really, not on that left brain Mercury level anyway. And it can also be an incredible use and abuse of power. That is, that the person initially experiences the abuse of power through whatever those planets represent, if it's the sun, father, or masculine male figures, and if it's the moon, it's mother and female figures. So, look, when you have a Sun-Pluto, it's pretty clear that you are here to undergo some cataclysmic cycles and processes through life, which will be quite painful actually, but when you are able to come through the other end, you are reborn, you know. So your evolution is absolutely accelerated in this life when you have a Sun-Pluto or Moon-Pluto, or even Venus-Pluto for that matter, even Mercury-Pluto. Just that Mercury and Venus represent different things, and today we're talking about the Sun and the Moon. Hi, Coco. So, just very briefly, if you want to explore the area of sexual abuse, because that's something that comes up a lot in people's lives, and it is often related to past life, past experiences, and bringing patterns and energies through, and unfinished karma, and, you know, abusing power in the past, therefore needing to experience someone abusing your power in this lifetime. You know, there's a lot of different ways of looking at this, and there's a lot of different possibilities. But you would look at the 8th house, Pluto, the sign Scorpio, you would look at Mars, you would look at Ceres, and you would also look at Uranus in the 8th house. Those combinations can all point to sexual abuse and the abuse of power. Okay, moving on to Moon-Pluto. Now, the moon is a very unconscious body. It rules obviously our emotional nature, our instinctual emotional reactions, patterns of behavior, to how we respond emotionally, basically to anything in day-to-day life, and certainly our emotional instinctual responses to our security. So when our security is threatened in some kind of way, that is the moon that feels threatened. Now, put Pluto there. Well, first of all, it's a person who has incredibly intense emotional body and an emotional nature. So incredibly intense feelings and emotions about everything. Certainly a very strong emotional bond or connection with the mother, which could have been quite traumatic at birth, and or as a person goes through their life, they can have a mother who's very controlling, very manipulative, or abusive. Or it can be a mother who was just carrying her own very intense emotional, heavy, dark sort of emotional stuff that you essentially pick up on and feel, and you basically you can feel your mother's emotional dark stuff, and she certainly feels yours as well. There's a lot of projection going on there too. You know, but on a positive manifestation, your mother could be a figure who encourages you to basically develop emotional self-reliance and inner security, because the moon is our inner security. And, you know, when you've got Moon-Pluto, you can go through really intense emotional periods of withdrawal and isolation, where you need to go inside and actually investigate and probe and have a look at what's going on down there in that emotional nature and body and memory. because it's Pluto, there can be a lot of dark stuff there, and a lot of dark stuff that you've brought in from the past. So it does need to be worked through, it does need to be understood, processed, transformed, and healed. You know, it can be being really paranoid about about how you feel and how you feel about others, or you know, really intense, obsessive emotions about others as well. You know, there's a lot of complexities with Moon Pluto because a lot of it is very unconscious, and initially, because it's unconscious, it's very hard to understand and very difficult to access. But certainly through a lot of conscious work, you know, a lot of healing work in the various modalities that are accessible to us these days, you can do incredible, powerful work through Moon Pluto, and then ultimately become an agent of transformation for yourself and for others. So you could have, it's a great placement for people to work in psychology. Who was it that had, is one of those people I mentioned? Yeah, Carl Jung had a Moon-Pluto opposition. So there you go. You know, there's that dynamic is very, very powerful for probing and getting deep into the emotional dynamics and psychology of human beings. It's a very, very powerful placement. So even if you don't become a psychologist or a therapist, you may become some kind of healer in an alternative field. And if you've got a Moon-Pluto aspect, it's so powerful to reach in and actually connect to the dynamics, the emotional, psychological dynamics and complexities of other people, and help them transform and go through a metamorphosis experience and heal and recover and be reborn. Very powerful aspect, Moon-Pluto. You know, of course, it's going to depend on its house placement and other aspects, but we're just talking about Moon-Pluto today. You can see just looking at that aspect itself, there's so much to unpack within that anyway. So, there you have it. There's a bit of an intro for you with regards to Sun-Pluto, Moon-Pluto. So if you have either of those aspects in your chart, I feel very confident that you would have related to a lot of what I shared with you today. And bear in mind as well that when you have a Sun-Pluto or Moon-Pluto aspect in your chart, particularly hard aspect, let's say, soft aspects included, but incredible intensity, cataclysmic cycles that one goes through. That doesn't happen every single day, obviously. Thank God, because if it did, you know, we'd be wiped out, really. So we have phases and periods, but I think what points to those different phases and different periods and different experiences that come through, which activate the intensity and depth and volume of a Sun-Pluto or Moon-Pluto, is when we have various transits or progressions, or secondary progressed moon. Although secondary progressed moon is, because it moves fairly quickly, still that can trigger a particular event that might last for a month or so, or 6 weeks, which can be life-changing. Some events can be life-changing in just a 6-week period. So yeah, look, there's various methods that you can use and techniques that you can look to when you want to see what's happening to Moon-Pluto, Sun-Pluto in your chart, to get a sense of, you know, when certain patterns or periods are going to be triggered and what that's going to mean as well. And obviously that's going to happen at different ages and stages through life. And, you know, sometimes that can happen when we're quite young too, because you can have, you know, Saturn hitting off, you know, your Moon-Pluto. You could have Saturn hitting off the Sun-Pluto. You know, there's so many various combinations, a lot of different energies. So, you know, as always, there's this ebb and flow and continuous movement. Nothing is static, nothing just stands still. There's this constant movement which is within us, and then obviously is seen out there. So Moon-Pluto, Sun-Pluto people, you are essentially incredibly powerful people who have tremendous ability to be agents of incredible change for your own life and for others in your own personal life, let's say, or your work life, of course. And then on a more extended, greater level, if you're working on a social, public level, then you have that capacity and that ability to influence and help transform collective, sort of components of whatever field you're actually engaging in. So really powerful placements, Sun-Pluto, Moon-Pluto. If you can learn how to tap into that energy, learn to understand what the Sun-Pluto means and what the Moon-Pluto means, and are at a stage in your life where you can see if you're projecting that energy, or if you've integrated it into you. And if you've integrated it into you, you are going to use that energy in a very powerful, healthy way. Clearly, if you're in the stages where you're still projecting it, then you're seeing it as that energy coming at you from out there, which can often be felt and experienced as being controlled or being abused or being exploited, and so forth. So yeah, intense people you guys are. For all of you out there who have these combinations. So yeah, I'll leave it there for today. Thanks for watching, guys, and thanks to new subscribers and to current subscribers, and thanks for your comments and questions. Again, I appreciate all of that, and I'll be back with more Pluto. See you guys soon. Namaste.